Sometimes the people who should embrace you the most are the ones who push you away the hardest. That's what happened to me. For nearly a decade, my in-laws made it clear I wasn't truly part of their family. But what they didn't know was that I'd been carrying a secret that would change everything. I had paid off their mortgage years ago, and the day I finally revealed the truth would alter our relationship forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I still remember the first time I met the Hendersons. It was Thanksgiving 2010, and I was bringing a pumpkin pie to their modest two-story colonial in Burlington, Vermont. The house itself was charming, white with navy blue shutters, a wraparound porch with a swing, and a massive oak tree in the front yard that had probably been there since before the Revolutionary War. But the warmth of that house didn't extend to its owners, at least not toward me. My then-girlfriend Emma had warned me that her parents were a bit traditional, but that was like saying the Arctic was a bit chilly. Richard and Margaret Henderson were more than traditional. They were guardians of a family legacy they believed I had no place in. "Mom, Dad, this is Jackson," Emma said, squeezing my hand as we stood in their foyer. I extended my other hand, balancing the pie precariously. Richard Henderson, tall, silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that Emma had inherited, barely acknowledged my hand before taking the pie and walking away. Margaret's handshake was firmer, but her smile never reached her eyes. "So, you're the boy who works at that tech startup," Margaret said, making tech startup sound like underground gambling ring. "Yes, ma'am. 3 years now. We just secured another round of funding, actually." I was trying. God knows I was trying. Was all she said before turning to help her husband in the kitchen. Emma shot me an apologetic look. "They'll warm up," she whispered. "They're just protective." That night at dinner, I learned exactly what they were protecting. A family. Narrative that had no room for someone like me. The Hendersons were old New England money, not extravagantly wealthy, but comfortable enough that they'd never had to worry. They had expectations for their only daughter, and those expectations didn't include a middle-class kid from Arizona whose parents had divorced when he was 12 and who had chosen to skip college to join a tech startup. "So, Jackson," Richard said, cutting into his turkey with surgical precision, "Emma tells us you didn't attend college." "No, sir. I had an opportunity to join Pixel Pulse right after high school. I'm the lead developer now." "A developer." He nodded slowly. "And what exactly does that entail?" I explained my work, the coding, the problem-solving, the innovation, but with each word I could see him mentally filing me under temporary and unsuitable. Margaret was subtler, but no less dismissive. Emma was top of her class at Dartmouth. She reminded me, as if I might have forgotten. The Hendersons have attended Ivy League schools for 3 generations. Emma tried to change the subject, but the message was clear. I didn't fit the Henderson mold, and they weren't about to reshape it for me. Despite that rocky start, Emma and I grew closer. Our relationship deepened, and a year later I asked her to marry me. She said yes immediately, tears streaming down her face as I knelt in front of her at the small Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. The Hendersons were less enthusiastic. "Don't you think this is a bit hasty?" Margaret asked when Emma called to share the news. "You're only 26, darling. There's so much world left to see." What she meant was, there are so many suitable men left to meet. Richard was more direct when he called me the next day. "Jackson, I respect that you care for my daughter, but marriage is a serious commitment. The Hendersons have certain traditions, standards. With all due respect, sir, I love Emma. And she loves me." "Love is a foundation, not a house," he replied cryptically. "You need more than that to build a life." Despite their reservations, Emma and I married in the spring of 2012. It was a small ceremony, partly by choice, partly because the Hendersons insisted they would only contribute financially to a wedding they had more say in planning. Emma was heartbroken that her parents were so cold, but she was also determined. She chose me, even as her father barely mustered a smile while walking her down the aisle. At the reception, I overheard Richard talking to one of his brothers. "This isn't what we wanted for her," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "He'll never really be family, not in the ways that matter." His words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. I was going to prove him wrong, not just with words, but with actions. I just didn't know how yet. Our first few years of marriage were a blend of profound joy and persistent tension. Emma and I bought a small starter home across town from her parents. We worked hard. She is a pediatrician at the local hospital, me continuing to rise through the ranks at Pixel Pulse. We had Sunday dinners at the Hendersons' house once a month, where I endured subtle jabs and probing questions about my career prospects. "The tech bubble always bursts eventually," Richard would say casually over pot roast. "What's your backup plan?" I didn't bother telling him that Pixel Pulse was rapidly expanding or that I now had equity in the company. There seemed little point. It was during one of these dinners, about 3 years into our marriage, that I noticed a change in the Hendersons. The usual barbs were there, but underneath was a new current of anxiety. Margaret seemed distracted, and Richard's typical commanding presence was subdued. When Emma went to help her mother clear the plates, Richard excused himself to take a phone call, leaving me alone in the dining room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but Richard's office was, just off the dining room, and his voice carried. "I understand the terms, but surely there's some flexibility," he was saying, his tone unusually pleading. "We've never missed a payment in 20 years. Yes, I know what the contract states." When he returned, his face was ashen. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see something was terribly wrong. Later that night, as Emma slept beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, turning over what I'd heard in my mind. The next day, I made some discreet inquiries. I had a friend, Tyler, who worked at Vermont National Bank, the same bank I'd heard Richard mention during his phone call. We'd been friends since high school when his family moved to my neighborhood in Phoenix, and he'd followed me east when I took the job at Pixel Pulse. I took him to lunch and, over sandwiches, carefully broached the subject. "Hey, this is probably crossing a line, but I'm worried about Emma's parents. I think they might be having financial problems." Tyler frowned. "You know I can't discuss clients, Jack." I know. I'm not asking for details. If they were in trouble, I'd want to help. They'd never accept it directly from me, though." Tyler studied me for a long moment. "I really can't say anything specific, but hypothetically, if someone wanted to help a family member with a mortgage, there are ways to do it anonymously through the bank. The payment would come from an unnamed benefactor." That was all I needed to hear. I didn't know exactly what trouble the Hendersons were in, but I knew I wanted to help. Not just for them, but for Emma, who adored her parents despite everything. The next day, I went to Vermont National Bank and asked to speak with a mortgage specialist. The woman who helped me, Melissa Thompson, was discreet and professional. "I'd like to inquire about paying off someone else's mortgage," I told her. "That's certainly possible," she replied. "Are you looking to make a one-time payment or take over the monthly payments?" "Actually, I'd like to pay off the entire remaining balance, but I want to do it anonymously." Melissa raised an eyebrow, but maintained her professional demeanor. "We can arrange that." The bank would process the payment and inform the mortgage holders that their loan has been satisfied by an anonymous donor. They would not be told who made the payment, though they would be free to accept or decline. "Why would anyone decline having their mortgage paid off?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Pride, mostly," she answered with a small smile. "Some people don't like feeling indebted, even to an anonymous benefactor." I nodded, thinking about Richard. Henderson's pride. How would I find out how much is left on their mortgage? You would need to provide the property address and the names on the mortgage. We can look up the public records for the original mortgage amount and date, but for the current payoff amount, we'd need authorization from the mortgage holders. This presented a challenge. I couldn't ask the Hendersons directly without revealing my intentions. I considered my options, then had an idea. What if I estimate high? Could I put money in escrow, and you could use what's needed for the payoff, and return the rest? Melissa thought for a moment. That's an unusual request, but yes, we could structure it that way. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The original mortgage on the Henderson home had been for $320,000 in 1995. Based on the terms I could see from public records and making some educated guesses about refinancing, I estimated they still owed around $180,000. To be safe, I decided to put $200,000 in escrow. It was a staggering amount, nearly all of my savings plus the stock options I'd been accumulating at Pixel Pulse. The company had been doing extremely well, and my early equity had grown significantly in value. I'd been saving for a larger house for Emma and me, maybe even a vacation home someday, but this felt more important. I didn't tell Emma what I was doing. Not because I thought she would disapprove, but because I knew she would worry about her parents' reaction if they ever found out. And honestly, a part of me feared that even this grand gesture wouldn't be enough to make the Hendersons see me as family. The process took several weeks. There were forms to fill out, identity verifications to complete, and escrow arrangements to make. Throughout it all, Melissa maintained absolute confidentiality. Finally, in late October 2015, she called to tell me everything was ready. The payment has been processed, she informed me. The Hendersons have been notified that an anonymous benefactor has paid off their mortgage in full. The remaining balance from your escrow, about $23,000, has been returned to your account. Did they accept it? I asked, suddenly nervous. Yes, after some initial confusion. Mr. Henderson had quite a few questions, as you might imagine, but ultimately, they accepted the gift. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I hadn't realized how stressed I'd been about the whole situation until it was resolved. Thank you, Melissa, for everything. You're welcome, she replied warmly. It's not often I get to be part of something so generous. That Sunday at dinner, I watched Richard and Margaret carefully for any signs of change. They seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. Richard even laughed at one of my jokes, a first in our 5-year acquaintance. Something good happened recently? I asked casually as Margaret served coffee after dinner. Margaret and Richard exchanged a glance. Actually, yes, Margaret said, the warmth in her voice surprising me. We've had some unexpected good fortune. Mortgage company made an error in our favor, Richard added gruffly. Quite a substantial one, I nodded, hiding my smile behind my coffee cup. That's great. You must be relieved. Indeed, Richard said, studying me with a new expression I couldn't quite decipher. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Wondered if he suspected, but if he did, he never said anything directly. What did change, gradually but unmistakably, was the Hendersons' attitude toward me. The cutting remarks became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Richard began asking genuine questions about my work, actually listening to the answers. Margaret started inviting me to help in the kitchen during visits, a privilege previously reserved for family members. Yet even as things improved, I kept my secret. It wasn't time yet. I wanted to earn their respect on my own merits, not through financial intervention. And slowly, I believed I was. 2 years passed. Emma and I were trying to start a family, and though we hadn't been successful yet, we remained hopeful. My relationship with the Hendersons continued to warm, though there was still a certain reserve, a line they wouldn't quite let me cross. Then, in December 2017, everything changed. It was 2 days before Christmas, and we were at the Hendersons for their annual holiday party. The house was beautifully decorated, with garlands draped along the staircase and a magnificent tree in the living room. Emma and Margaret were in the kitchen, preparing appetizers, while Richard was showing me his collection of vintage model trains in the basement, another first. My father started this collection, he explained, carefully adjusting a miniature signal tower. I've added to it over the years. Someday it will go to Emma's children. He paused, then added, Your children. I looked at him in surprise. It was the closest he'd ever come to fully accepting me as part of the family's future. Our moment was interrupted by the doorbell. Richard excused himself to answer it, and I followed him upstairs. Standing in the foyer was a man in a dark suit, holding a thick envelope. Richard Henderson? The man asked. Yes, that's me. I'm David Lawrence from Vermont National Bank. He handed Richard the envelope. I'm here to deliver some important documents regarding your property. Richard's face clouded with confusion. Our mortgage was settled over 2 years ago. There shouldn't be any issues. David nodded. These are actually the final deed documents showing the property is now fully in your name, free and clear. The bank apologizes for the delay in processing these. Also, the identity of your benefactor has requested to be revealed at this time. My heart stopped. I had made no such request. There must be some mistake, I stammered, stepping forward. I never requested that my identity be revealed. David Lawrence checked his paperwork, frowning. I apologize for the confusion, but according to our records, the request came through last week. It's signed by, Tyler Walsh? My stomach dropped. Tyler. He must have decided that after 2 years, it was time for the truth to come out. I hadn't spoken to him about the Hendersons' mortgage since that day over sandwiches, but he had processed much of the paperwork. He knew what today was. The Hendersons' annual Christmas party was somewhat legendary in our social circle. Richard's eyes darted between David and me, his expression morphing from confusion to suspicion. Jackson, what's going on here? Emma and Margaret had emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. Who's at the door? Emma asked, wiping her hands on her apron. David cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm from Vermont National Bank. I'm here. About the mortgage payment that was made anonymously 2 years ago. He looked directly at me. Mr. Thompson here is the benefactor who paid off your mortgage in full. The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, Emma's wide with shock, Margaret's mouth slightly open in disbelief, and Richard's narrowed in what I couldn't tell was anger or something else. Jackson, Emma whispered. Is this true? I nodded slowly. Yes, I overheard Richard on the phone that Sunday dinner back in 2015. You seemed worried, and I wanted to help. But I knew you wouldn't accept it if you knew it was from me. $200,000, Richard said, his voice hoarse. You paid off $200,000 of our debt without telling anyone? Without telling Emma? I winced at the mention of keeping it from Emma. That had been the hardest part, maintaining the secret from the person I shared everything with. It wasn't quite that much, I said quietly. And the company was doing well. I had stock options. But why? Margaret asked, stepping forward. After how we treated you, the things we said. I looked at her directly. Because you're Emma's family, and that makes you my family too, even if you didn't see me that way. Emma moved to my side, taking my hand. Her eyes were filled with tears. Jack, we could have used that money for our own house, for our future. We have a future, I assured her. The company's still growing. We're doing fine. David cleared his throat again. Well, I should be going. All the paperwork is in order now. Happy holidays to you all. He nodded politely and slipped out, leaving us in a thick, awkward silence. Richard was the first to move. He walked to the liquor cabinet in the corner of the living room and pulled out a bottle of Macallan 18, the scotch he reserved for special occasions. He poured 5 fingers' worth into a crystal tumbler and downed half of it in one go. "Richard," Margaret said gently, her hand on his arm. He shook his head. 2 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For 2 years, we've wondered who could have possibly done this for us. We thought maybe it was your old college roommate, Peggy, who went on to make that fortune in pharmaceuticals. Or perhaps it was a mistake, the bank applying someone else's payment to our account. We never once thought. He looked at me, his eyes bright. We never thought it could be you. I didn't want you to know, I admitted. It wasn't about getting credit or making you feel obligated. I just wanted to help. But the timing, Margaret pressed. How did you know we were in trouble? I explained about overhearing Richard's phone call, about how different they had seemed that evening, about my conversation with Tyler that had set everything in motion. We almost lost everything, Richard confessed, setting down his glass. Bad, investments, a market downturn. I was too proud to tell anyone, even Emma. We were 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Emma gasped. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Because parents are supposed to help their children, not the other way around, he said firmly. And certainly not their children's spouses. That's ridiculous, Emma retorted. Family helps family, period. Family, Richard repeated, looking at me with new eyes. That's what you said, isn't it? That we're your family too. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Richard set down his glass and crossed the room to where I stood. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he pulled me into an embrace so tight I could barely breathe. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. You saved our home. You saved our dignity, and I repaid you with nothing but disdain. When he released me, his eyes were wet. Margaret stepped forward next, taking my hands in hers. We were wrong about you, Jackson, she said simply. So very wrong. The party that night was unlike any other Henderson gathering I'd experienced. The guests arrived, unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred just before their arrival. But they couldn't miss the change in Richard and Margaret's behavior toward me. I was no longer the outsider to be tolerated, but a central figure. Richard introduced me as my son-in-law, Jackson, with a warmth I'd never heard before. Later, as the guests mingled over eggnog and Christmas cookies, Richard pulled me aside, into his study. I owe you an apology, he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather armchairs by the fireplace. Many apologies, in fact. It's water under the bridge, I assured him. He shook his head firmly. No, it's not. I judged you without knowing you. I decided who you were based on superficial things, where you went to school, what your parents did, your career choice. I missed what mattered most. He leaned forward. You're a good man, Jackson. A better man than me in many ways. I appreciate that, Richard, but let me finish, he interrupted gently. When Emma first brought you home, I was convinced she was making a mistake. I thought you were temporary, someone she'd outgrow. Every year that passed, I kept waiting for the relationship to run its course. He smiled ruefully. But you proved more permanent than our mortgage. Despite myself, I laughed. The thing is, Richard continued, I've realized that I got it exactly backward. It's not about whether you were good enough for our family. The question was whether we deserved to have someone like you in ours. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small box. This was my father's. He gave it to me when I married Margaret. I'd like you to have it. He handed me the box. Inside was a vintage pocket watch, gold with an intricate engraving of the Henderson family crest. Richard, I can't accept this, I protested. This should go to your son or to Emma's son someday. It's going exactly where it belongs, he insisted. To my son. If you'll finally let me call you that. The words hit me like a physical force. After 7 years of feeling like an outsider, of trying to earn a place in this family, here it was, being offered freely, without reservation. "I'd be honored," I managed to say. The door to the study opened and Emma peeked in. "Everything okay here? Mom's looking for both of you. It's time for the toast." Richard stood, clapping me on the shoulder. "We're coming, just having a long overdue conversation." The weeks that followed were surreal. The Hendersons embraced me with an enthusiasm that was almost disorienting after years of coolness. Margaret called me regularly just to chat. Richard invited me to join his squash club. They both started dropping hints about grandchildren that made Emma roll her eyes but secretly pleased her. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Tyler hadn't sent those papers?" Emma asked one night as we lay in bed. "If your secret had stayed a secret?" I considered this. I think things were already changing, even before they knew. They were warming up to me. "But now they're practically adopting you," Emma said with a laugh. "Dad actually bragged about you to Uncle James last week. Uncle James, who he's been competing with since they were kids." "What did he say?" I couldn't help but ask. "He told him how you've built Pixel Pulse from the ground up, how you had the foresight to join a startup before everyone was doing it. He made it sound like you're some tech visionary." I snorted. "I'm just a guy who got lucky with stock options." Emma propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at me seriously. "You're more than that, and you know it. You're the guy who sacrificed his savings to help people who had been nothing but cold to him. Who does that? Someone who loves his wife very much?" I replied, pulling her down for a kiss. In the spring of 2018, we had more cause for celebration. Emma was pregnant. The Hendersons were ecstatic, especially when we learned it was a boy. Richard immediately began making plans for fishing trips and baseball games. Margaret started knitting baby blankets and researching the best preschools. "We should discuss names," Emma said one evening over dinner at her parents' house. "We were thinking of honoring family traditions." Richard looked pleased. "The firstborn son in the Henderson family has been Richard for 4 generations. Actually," I interjected gently, "we were thinking of Alexander, after my grandfather." There was a moment of silence, and I tensed, wondering if I'd overstepped. Old habits die hard, and part of me still expected rejection from the Hendersons. But Richard surprised me. "Alexander," he repeated, testing the name. "Alexander Henderson Thompson. It has a strong sound to it." He raised his glass. "To Alexander, then. May he have his father's character and his mother's intelligence." Margaret beamed. "And if the next one is a girl, perhaps Margaret?" Emma laughed. "Let's get through this one first, Mom." Alexander was born on a crisp October morning, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. The Hendersons were at the hospital before he was even 2 hours old, bearing gifts and barely contained excitement. As I watched Richard holding his grandson, whispering promises of fishing trips and baseball games, I felt a sense of completion. I hadn't known I was missing. The circle had closed. I was no longer the outsider looking in, but an integral part of this family's story. That night, after Emma and Alexander had both fallen asleep, I stepped out of the hospital room to get some air. Richard was in the waiting area, staring out the window at the city lights. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, joining him. He shook his head. "Too much on my mind. Good things, mostly." He turned to look at me. "You know, I keep thinking about that day. We found out about the mortgage, about what you said regarding family. That we're family whether you saw me that way or not," I recalled. "Yes, it made me realize something important." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Family isn't about where you come from or what name you were born with. It's about who stays, who sacrifices, who loves without keeping score." He squeezed my shoulder. "By that measure, you were family long before any of us realized it." Standing there in the quiet hospital corridor, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that first tense Thanksgiving to this moment of profound connection. I thought about the barriers that had seemed insurmountable and how they had fallen, not all at once with a grand gesture, but gradually through persistence and quiet acts of love. "I have something for you," Richard said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a check for $200,000. "Richard, no," I protested immediately. "That's not why I did it. I never expected repayment." "Know that," he said firmly, "and that's precisely why I'm doing this. Not to erase a debt, there's no debt between family, but to invest in Alexander's future, and any brothers or sisters who might come along." He smiled. "Consider it a grandfather's prerogative." I started to object again, but he held up his hand. "Margaret and I are doing very well now. The business has recovered. Investments have matured. We want to do this, Jackson. Please." Looking into his eyes, I saw the sincerity there, the genuine desire to contribute to our family's future. And I realized that accepting his gift was as important as his accepting mine had been. Both were acts of love, of inclusion, of belonging. "Thank you," I said simply, tucking the envelope into my pocket. He nodded, satisfied. "Now, tell me more about this expansion Pixel Pulse is planning." Margaret mentioned something about international offices. As we sat in that hospital waiting room, discussing business strategies and future plans with my newborn son sleeping just down the hall, I marveled at how far we'd come. The Hendersons had said I'd never be family, but they'd been wrong. I'd been family all along. They just hadn't recognized it yet. Sometimes the greatest gifts we give aren't the ones that cost money, but the ones that require patience, that demand we see the best in people even when they can't see it in us. My gift to the Hendersons hadn't really been the mortgage payment. It had been the persistent belief that one day we would truly be family. And now, at last, we were. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Alexander, now an energetic kindergartner with his mother's blue eyes and my stubborn chin, had been joined by a little sister, Olivia Margaret Thompson, who at 3 years old already had her grandfather wrapped around her finger. Life had settled into a rhythm I once thought impossible. Sunday dinners at the Hendersons were now the highlight of our week rather than an exercise in endurance. Richard had become my mentor in many ways, offering business advice that proved invaluable as Pixel Pulse continued its meteoric rise. Margaret and Emma had grown closer than ever, united in motherhood and family traditions. The $200,000 Richard had given us that night in the hospital had been invested wisely, growing substantially as part of a college fund for both children. It was a tangible symbol of how far we'd come, from suspicion and rejection to complete trust and integration. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and our test came on a rainy Tuesday in April 2023. I was in Seattle for a major tech conference when I got the call from Emma. Her voice was tight with worry, barely holding back tears. "Jack, it's Dad. He's had a heart attack." My stomach dropped. "How bad?" "They're not sure yet. Mom found him in his study. The ambulance just got him to Burlington Medical. I'm on my way there now." "I'm coming home," I said immediately, already packing my laptop. "I'll be on the next flight." "You don't have to. Your keynote speech is tomorrow. Dad would understand." "I'm coming home," I repeated firmly. "Family comes first." I managed to get on a red-eye flight back to Vermont, landing at 5:30 a.m. By the time I reached the hospital, Richard had been stabilized but remained in the ICU. Margaret was sitting vigil by his bedside, while Emma had gone home briefly to check on the kids, who were staying with our neighbor. Margaret looked up when I entered, her face pale and drawn, with fatigue. Without a word, she stood and embraced me. "Any change?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical. The damage to his heart is significant. Her voice broke on the last word. I looked at Richard, lying unnaturally still amid a tangle of tubes and wires. His skin had a grayish pallor, and the steady beep of monitors seemed too loud in the hushed room. It was jarring to see him this way. Richard Henderson had always embodied vitality and strength. "You should get some rest," I told Margaret gently. "I'll stay with him." "I can't leave him," she protested weakly. "Just for a few hours. You'll be no good to him if you collapse yourself." I squeezed her hand. "I promise I'll call the moment anything changes?" "Eventually," she agreed, gathering her coat and purse. At the door, she paused. "He was working on something for you, you know. Before this happened. He wouldn't tell me what it was, just that it was important. Said, he wanted to surprise you." After she left, I pulled a chair close to Richard's bed and settled in for the vigil. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor became a meditation of sorts, each beep a reminder that he was still with us, still fighting. "You know, this isn't how I pictured spending my morning," I said to his unconscious form. "I was supposed to be telling a room full of tech executives about Pixel Pulse's new AI integration. Instead, I'm here telling you that you need to get better because your grandkids aren't done climbing all over you yet." I talked for hours, filling the sterile silence with stories about Alexander's first t-ball game, Olivia's precocious vocabulary, updates on the company. I wasn't sure if he could hear me, but it felt right to keep talking, to maintain that connection. Emma arrived mid-morning, bringing coffee and the news that the kids were asking about their grandfather. "What did you tell them?" I asked, accepting. "The coffee gratefully. That Grandpa's heart needed fixing, and the doctors are helping him." She sank into the chair next to mine, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Alex wants to give him his lucky baseball card to help him get better." I smiled at that. Alexander had received the card, a rookie Mike Trout, from Richard on his 5th birthday. It was his prized possession. That might be just the medicine he needs, I said. For 3 days we maintained our rotation, Emma, Margaret, and I taking turns at Richard's bedside. The doctors remained cautiously optimistic as he stabilized, though he had yet to regain consciousness. On the 4th day, while I was sitting alone with Richard during the early morning hours, I noticed his fingers twitch. I leaned forward, hope surging. "Richard, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He looked disoriented, gaze darting around the room before finally focusing on me. "Jackson?" His voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. "I'm here," I assured him, pressing the call button for the nurse. "You're in the hospital. You had a heart attack, but you're going to be okay." He tried to speak again, but coughed. Instead, I helped him take a small sip of water. "How long?" he managed to ask. 4 days. You gave us quite a scare." His hand fumbled for mine, surprisingly strong despite his condition. "My desk," he said urgently. "Top drawer. Key in. My study cabinet. Important." Before I could ask what he meant, the nurse arrived, followed shortly by the doctor. I was ushered out while they examined him. In the hallway, I called Emma and Margaret with the good news, then sat trying to decipher Richard's cryptic message. What was so important in his desk drawer that it was among his first thoughts upon waking? When I was allowed back in, Richard was more alert, though clearly exhausted. The doctor had been encouraging. His recovery would be long but promising. With proper care and rehabilitation. "You were saying something about your desk drawer?" I prompted once we were alone again. Richard nodded weakly. "Need you to get something for me. Papers. In a blue folder. Marked with your name. It can wait." "Until you're better," I assured him. He shook his head with unexpected vehemence. "No, now. Please, Jackson." I recognized the stubborn set of his jaw, the same expression Alexander got when he was determined about something. "All right. I'll go this afternoon when Margaret is here." He relaxed visibly. "Thank you." That afternoon, with Margaret's permission, I drove to the Henderson home. The house felt oddly quiet without the usual bustle of family activity. In Richard's study, everything was exactly as he'd left it. A half-empty coffee mug on the desk, reading glasses folded beside an open book, a notepad with his distinctive handwriting. I found the key where he'd said it would be, in a small cabinet, behind his desk. The top drawer of his desk was locked and the key turned smoothly. Inside, among various papers and folders, was a blue folder with my name written on the tab in Richard's precise handwriting. Curious, I opened it. The first document was a letter, handwritten on Richard's personal stationery. Dear Jackson, if you're reading this, it means I either finally worked up the courage to share this with you, or something has happened to me, and you're following my instructions to find it. I hope it's the former. But life doesn't always conform to our plans. When you paid off our mortgage 8 years ago, you changed more than just our financial situation. You changed me, my perspective, my understanding of what family truly means. I've spent these years trying to be worthy of the lesson you taught me. What you don't know is that your generosity inspired me to do something similar. 3 years ago, I tracked down your father in Arizona. I stopped reading, my hand shaking slightly. My father, the man who had walked out on my mother and me when I was 12, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 20 years, had deliberately lost track of him after my mother died during my senior year of high school. With a deep breath, I continued reading. I know your relationship with him has been non-existent for many years. You rarely speak of him, and when you do, the pain is evident. I hope you'll forgive my interference, but after what you did for us, I wanted to understand the man who had raised such a son, however briefly. What I found was a man drowning in regret. Leonard Thompson has spent the past 2 decades trying to outrun his failures, as a husband, as a father, as a man. When I located him, he was living in a small apartment in Phoenix, working as a night manager at a hotel. He'd been sober for 11 years and had tried to find you multiple times, but respected your apparent wish for no contact. We spoke at length. I told him about you, about the man you've become, about Emma and the children, about your success. He wept when I showed him pictures of Alexander and Olivia. They have his eyes, he told me, my father's eyes. In the folder, you'll find several letters he's written to you over the years but never sent. You'll also find the deed to a small property outside Burlington, a cabin on the lake that I purchased and had transferred into your name. Leonard has been living there for the past 6 months at my invitation. He's been helping me restore it as a surprise for you and the family. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to presume. The relationship between a father and son is sacred and your wounds run deep. But I also believe in second chances. You taught me their value when you gave one to me. The choice of whether to see him is entirely yours. He understands that you may want nothing to do with him, and he's prepared to return to Arizona without making his presence known to you if that's your decision. But he is here, and he is changed, and he would very much like the opportunity to meet his grandchildren if nothing else. Whatever you decide, know that I support you. You've been the son I never had, Jackson. You've taught me more about true family values than generations of Hendersons before me. With love and respect, Richard, I sat back in Richard's chair, the letter trembling in my hands. My father, here in Burlington. The idea was so foreign I could barely process it. Behind the letter were photographs, recent ones of a man I barely recognized. Leonard Thompson had aged considerably in 20 years. His dark hair was now silver, his face weathered. But his eyes, my eyes, Alexander's eyes, were clear and sober in a way I didn't remember from childhood. There were also the letters Richard had mentioned, a dozen or more, each in my father's familiar scrawl, each dated and never sent. I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. The final document was indeed a property deed for a lakeside cabin about 30 minutes outside town, legally. Transferred to my name 6 months ago. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Emma. Jack, are you okay? You've been gone for a while. I'm fine, I said automatically, though I wasn't sure that was true. I found what your dad wanted me to find. It's complicated. I'll explain when I see you. Is it bad news? Concern colored her voice. No, just unexpected. I'll be there soon. I carefully returned everything to the folder and locked the drawer. As I drove back to the hospital, my mind raced with conflicting emotions: anger at the past, confusion about the present, uncertainty about the future. What right did my father have to re-enter my life after all this time? What right did Richard have to facilitate it? But beneath the initial turmoil was something else. A small, quiet voice reminding me of my own words from years ago. Because you're Emma's family. And that makes you my family too, even if you didn't see me that way. Could the same principle apply to the man who had abandoned me? Was there room in the family we'd built for one more chance at redemption? Back at the hospital, Richard was awake, watching the door anxiously as I entered. Margaret and Emma were both there, and from their expressions, I knew Richard had already told them about my father. You found it, Richard said, his voice stronger than it had been that morning. I nodded, pulling a chair close to his bed. I did. Are you angry? He asked directly. I considered the question carefully. I don't know what I am yet. Surprised. Confused. I'm a little overwhelmed. I should have told you sooner, he admitted. But I wanted to be sure. About him. About whether this was the right thing. And are you? Sure? Richard's gaze was steady. People can change, Jackson. Sometimes they just need a reason to. You were my reason. He paused. Maybe you could be his too. Emma moved to stand beside me, her hand on my shoulder. It's your decision, Jack, no one else's. I looked around at the faces of my family. Emma, my partner in everything. Margaret, who had become a second mother to me. Richard, who had transformed from adversary to father figure. Each of them had traveled their own journey to accept me, to love me. Could I offer the same opportunity to the man who had given me life, if not much else? I don't know if I'm ready to see him, I admitted. But I think I'd like to read his letters first, and then decide. Richard nodded, relief evident in his expression. That's all anyone can ask. 2 weeks later, Richard was released from the hospital with strict instructions for rest and rehabilitation. The family fell into a new routine, Emma and I taking turns driving him to cardiac therapy, Margaret managing his medication schedule with military precision, the children drawing get-well pictures that plastered the walls of their grandparents' home. Throughout it all, the blue folder sat in my office at home, the letters inside still unread. I couldn't bring myself to open them, but I couldn't discard them either. They represented a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. Then, one Saturday, morning, Alexander found me staring at the folder on my desk. What's that, Daddy? He asked, climbing onto my lap. Letters, I answered honestly. From your other grandfather, the one you haven't met. His eyes widened. I have another grandpa? Like how Olivia has another grandma? Olivia had been named after Emma's maternal grandmother, who had passed away before I met the family. Something like that, I said carefully. Alexander considered this with the solemn deliberation of a 5-year-old. Is he nice like Grandpa Richard? Sure. Question hit me like a physical blow. The truth was, I didn't know. The man in those letters might be entirely different from the father I remembered, just as Richard had become a different man from the one who had first disapproved of me. I'm not sure, I told Alexander. I haven't seen him in a very long time. You should read the letters, he said with the simple logic of childhood. Then you'll know. That night, after the children were asleep, I finally opened the first letter. It was dated 16 years ago, just after my mother's funeral. Dear Jackson, they wouldn't let me attend the funeral. Your aunt made it clear I wasn't welcome, and I respected that. But I stood across the street, watching from a distance as they laid your mother to rest. I saw you there, so grown up, so strong even in your grief. I wanted to tell you how proud I was, how sorry I was for everything, but the words seemed inadequate after so many years of silence. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret walking out that door. The man I was then, weak, selfish, trapped in addiction, he's not who I am now. But that doesn't erase what I did to you and your mother. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If not, I understand. Either way, know that I love you, son. I always have, even when I was too broken to show it. Dad, one by one, I read through the letters. Chronicles of my father's journey through sobriety, his attempts to rebuild his life, his distant pride in my accomplishments that he learned about through mutual acquaintances or occasional internet searches. Each letter revealed a man struggling to reconcile with his past while finding a way forward. The most recent letter was dated just 3 months ago. Dear Jackson, the cabin is nearly finished. Richard says he plans to tell you about me soon. I'm terrified and hopeful all at once. The idea of seeing you after all these years, of possibly meeting my grandchildren, it's more than I ever dared dream of. But I want you to know that I expect nothing. If you decide you want no part of me in your life, I will respect that decision without question. You owe me nothing. Not your time. Not your forgiveness. Certainly not a place in your family. That's a privilege I forfeited long ago. Whatever you decide, I am grateful to Richard for this chance. And I am endlessly proud of the man you've become. Not just your success, but the husband and father Richard describes. You broke the cycle, son. You became a better man than I ever was. With love, always, Dad is. I finished the last letter. I realized Emma was standing in the doorway, watching me. What are you thinking? She asked softly. I let out a long breath. I'm thinking about second chances, about the past and the future, about what kind of example I want to set for our children. She came to sit beside me, taking my hand. And I think I'd like to meet him. Not necessarily to forgive, at least not yet, but to listen. To see who he is now. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I think that's brave. The following weekend, we drove to the cabin by the lake. Richard had insisted on coming, despite the doctor's orders to rest. I started this, he said stubbornly. I want to see it through. The cabin was small but beautifully restored. Cedar siding, a stone chimney, wide windows overlooking the water. As we pulled up, a man stepped onto the porch. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. Then he smiled nervously, and I saw Alexander in the curve of his mouth. He looks like you, Emma whispered. I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. As we got out of the car, Richard moved to my side. Remember, he said quietly, family isn't just about where you come from. It's about who stays, who sacrifices, who loves without keeping score. I looked at the man who had once said I'd never be family, who was now teaching me about its true meaning. Thank you, I said simply. He nodded, understanding all that those 2 words contained. Together, we walked toward the cabin, toward my father, toward whatever new chapter awaited us all. The first meeting with my father was awkward, to say the least. We stood facing each other on the porch of the cabin, 20 years of absence stretching between us like a chasm. Leonard Thompson had aged into a man I barely recognized, his hair entirely silver, his face weathered by time and hard. Living? His frame slightly stupid, but his eyes, my eyes, Alexander's eyes, were clear and nervous. Jackson, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for coming. I nodded stiffly, not yet ready to offer more. Emma squeezed my hand in silent support. This is my wife, Emma, I said formally. And this is her father, Richard Henderson. Leonard shook their hands with evident gratitude. Richard and I have gotten to know each other pretty well these past months, he said. He's a good man. The best, I agreed, glancing at my father-in-law, who looked uncharacteristically anxious. Well, Leonard said, gesturing toward the door. Would you like to see inside? Richard and I have been working on it since last fall. The interior of the cabin was warm and inviting. Pine paneling, a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that looked both new and somehow perfectly suited to the rustic setting. Large windows showcased the lake view, now sparkling with afternoon sunlight. It's beautiful, Emma said genuinely. Most of the credit goes to your father, Leonard told her. He designed everything. I just provided the labor. Richard shook his head. Leonard is being modest. He's a skilled craftsman. That dining table? He built it by hand. I studied the table, solid oak with intricate inlays along the border. It was the kind of piece that could become a family heirloom, passed down through generations. The thought was disorienting, considering the source. Would anyone like coffee? Leonard asked, clearly desperate to occupy himself with the familiar rituals of hospitality. While he and Richard busied themselves in the kitchen, Emma and I wandered to the deck overlooking the lake. Are you okay? She asked quietly. I exhaled slowly. I don't know what I am. It's surreal. Him being here, making coffee, building furniture like some normal, everyday father. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. He seems nervous, Emma observed. Scared, almost. Good, I replied sharply, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that wasn't fair. It was honest, she countered. You're allowed to be angry, Jack. No one expects you to just forget the past. We rejoined the others for an uncomfortable coffee session, making stilted small talk about the cabin renovations, the weather, Richard's recovery progress. Leonard kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression a mixture of hope and resignation. After about an hour, I'd reached my limit. We should get going, I announced abruptly. Richard needs his rest, and we told the babysitter we'd be back by 5. If Leonard was disappointed by the brevity of our visit, he hid it well. Of course. Thank you for coming. It meant a lot. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then pulled a small wooden box from a shelf. I made this, for Alexander, and this one for Olivia. He produced a second, smaller box. You don't have to tell them they're from me. They can just be gifts. I accepted the boxes wordlessly, unable to formulate a response that wasn't either coldly dismissive or dishonestly warm. I'm here, he added quietly. Whenever, if ever, you want to talk more. No pressure. On the drive home, Richard broke the tense silence. I know that wasn't easy for you. Why did you do it? I asked the question that had been burning in me since I'd read his letter. Why track him down after all this time? Richard considered this carefully. When you paid off our mortgage, it wasn't just financial freedom you gave us. It was a second chance at being better people, better parents, better in-laws. I wanted to give something of equal value back to you. He paused. Not your father. I can't guarantee he'll be what you need him to be. But the opportunity to decide for yourself who he is now and what, if anything, you want from that relationship. What if I decide I want nothing to do with him? Then that's your choice, and I'll support it completely. Richard's voice was firm. This isn't about obligating you to forgive him. It's about giving you information that was hidden from you. The fact that he's sought you out all these years, that he's tried to change. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. That night, After the children were asleep, I opened the wooden boxes Leonard had given us. Alexander's contained a meticulously crafted miniature baseball diamond, complete with tiny players that could be moved around the bases. Olivia held a delicate music box that played Somewhere Over the Rainbow when opened, with a tiny ballerina that spun in the center. Each was exquisitely made, clearly the work of many hours. Each represented a grandfather's longing to connect with grandchildren he'd never met. "These must have taken him months," Emma said softly, examining the details of the music box. I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. The man who had walked out on my mother and me had apparently spent countless hours crafting these gifts for children he had no guarantee of ever meeting. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about Leonard more than I wanted to. The memory of his nervous smile, the careful way he moved around me, as if afraid one wrong step would shatter the fragile opportunity he'd been given. It all played on repeat in my mind. I hadn't opened the gifts to the children, unsure whether I wanted to introduce his presence into their lives, even indirectly. Meanwhile, Richard's recovery continued steadily. During one of our drives to his cardiac rehabilitation session, he broached the subject again. "Have you thought any more about your father?" he asked carefully. "I think about little else," I admitted. "And?" I sighed. "And I'm conflicted. The man I met isn't the father I remember." "But is that because he's changed? Or because my childhood memories are filtered through a child's pain and confusion?" Richard nodded thoughtfully. "When I first met him, I had the same question. That's why I took my time. Watched him, tested him in small ways before I ever mentioned bringing him into your life." "Tested him how?" "I offered him money, claiming it was for cabin supplies. He refused. I deliberately showed up late to our work sessions to see if he'd be drinking out of frustration or boredom. He never was. I checked his references from his job in Arizona, 12 years of perfect attendance, promotions, respect from colleagues." Richard glanced at me. "I wouldn't have brought him here if I wasn't reasonably confident he was sincere." I appreciated Richard's thoroughness, his protective instinct that had once been directed against me now working on my behalf. But it didn't resolve my deeper question. Could a person truly change so fundamentally? Could the father who abandoned us become someone worthy of a place in my children's lives? A week later, I found myself driving to the cabin alone. I hadn't planned the visit, hadn't mentioned it to Emma or Richard. Something in me needed to see Leonard without the buffer of family around, to confront the past directly, whatever the outcome. He was surprised to see me, opening the door with raised eyebrows and cautious hope. "Jackson, I wasn't expecting anyone today." "I wasn't expecting to come," I replied honestly. "But here I am." He invited me in, offered coffee, which I declined, and we sat awkwardly in the living room, the silence heavy between us. "I read your letters," I finally said. His eyes widened slightly. "All of them?" I nodded. "You were at Mom's funeral?" "Across the street," he confirmed. "Behind the big oak tree in the cemetery. I knew your Aunt Diane would have had me removed if I'd tried to attend properly." He looked down at his hands. "She was right to keep me away. I'd lost that right long before." "Why did you leave?" The question that had haunted me for 20 years finally spilled out. "Was it something I did? Something Mom did? God, no," he said vehemently. "It was nothing either of you did. It was me, my weakness, my addiction, my cowardice. Your mother was a saint for putting up with me as long as she did. And you?" His voice broke. "You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away because I couldn't face my own failures. You never tried to contact us." It wasn't quite an accusation, but close. I did, actually. The first year, I called several times. Your mother rightfully hung up on me. After that, she changed the number. He rubbed his face. "I sent birthday, Cards for a few years, but they came back unopened. Eventually, I told myself it was better for you both if I stayed away completely. That was a lie, of course. It was just easier for me. Another act of cowardice. His candor was disarming. There was no self-justification, no attempt to rewrite history in his favor. Just a raw acknowledgement of his failures. "When did you get sober?" I asked. 11 years ago. After hitting rock bottom, living in my car, losing yet another job, nearly dying of alcohol poisoning. I ended up in a county hospital, then a treatment program. Took me 3 attempts before it stuck. He met my gaze directly. "I wish I could tell you I got sober for you and your mother, but the truth is I got sober for myself. It was only afterward that I began to understand the full extent of what I destroyed and started trying to make amends. Too late for your mother, but I hoped maybe not for you." We talked for hours, about my childhood after he left, about my mother's struggle to raise me alone, about her battle with cancer during my senior year. I told him about meeting Emma, about the early friction with her parents, about the mortgage. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, his eyes frequently filling with tears he tried to blink away. "You're a better man than I ever was," he said when I finished. Breaking the cycle like that, it takes extraordinary strength and character. I had help, I acknowledged. Emma. Her parents, eventually. Even my mother, who showed me what resilience looked like. "She was always the strongest of us," he agreed softly. As evening approached, I stood to leave. The conversation had been exhausting, but also strangely cathartic, like lancing a wound that had been festering for decades. "The gifts you made for Alexander and Olivia," I said as I prepared to go. "They're beautiful." Hope flickered across his face. "They enjoy them?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I haven't given them yet. I wasn't sure if I was ready to introduce you into their lives, even in that small way." He nodded, disappointment. Evident but accepted. "I understand. It's your decision, of course. But I think I will," I added. "Give them the gifts, I mean. And if you'd like, maybe you could meet them. Someday. Not yet, but someday." The gratitude in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "I would like that very much," he said simply. The following weekend, I gave Alexander and Olivia their gifts from someone special. Alexander was immediately entranced by the baseball diamond, moving the tiny players around with delight. Olivia danced to her music box, twirling like the ballerina inside. "Who made these, Daddy?" Alexander asked, always curious. I took a deep breath. "Someone who would very much like to meet you both someday. Another grandfather." His eyes widened. "The one from the letters?" I nodded. "His name is Leonard. He's my father." "Is he nice now?" Alexander asked, remembering our previous conversation. "I think maybe he's trying to be," I answered honestly. Over the next several months, my relationship with Leonard evolved cautiously. We met occasionally at the cabin, sometimes alone, sometimes with Emma. We talked about the past, but increasingly about the present. My work at Pixel Pulse, his new job as a carpenter's apprentice in Burlington, his ongoing sobriety meetings. He never pressured me about meeting the children, though I could see the hope in his eyes whenever they were mentioned. Richard continued to improve, eventually returning to his regular golf game and business consulting. His relationship with Leonard had developed into a genuine friendship, something I found both strange and oddly fitting. These two father figures in my life forming their own connection. It was Richard who finally prompted the next step. During a family barbecue in his backyard in late summer, he pulled me aside. "I've been thinking," he began, flipping burgers with careful attention. "Labor Day weekend, the cabin, all of us, including the children. If you're ready." I watched. Alexander and Olivia playing tag with their cousins across the lawn, their laughter carrying on the warm air. You think it's time? I think it's your decision, Richard replied. But yes, if you're asking my opinion, I think Leonard has earned at least the chance to meet them, and they've been asking about him more frequently. This was true. Since giving them the gifts and mentioning another grandfather, both children had peppered me with questions about Leonard. Where did he live? Why hadn't they met him before? Did he like dinosaurs? This last one was particularly important to Alexander. What about you? I asked Emma later that night. What do you think? She considered the question carefully. I think you've been healing something important these past months, both with your father and within yourself. She smiled. And I think those wooden toys have made our children very curious about their mystery grandfather. Labor Day weekend, I mused. That gives us a month to prepare them, and me. And him, Emma added. When I called Leonard to propose the meeting, the phone went silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Leonard? Are you there? Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'm here. I never thought this day would come. Are you sure? I'm sure it's time for them to meet you, I said carefully. The rest, we'll have to see. The Labor Day weekend at the cabin was a blend of nervous energy and unexpected joy. Leonard had prepared meticulously, stocking the refrigerator with kid-friendly snacks, setting up a tire swing from the massive oak tree overlooking the lake, even building a small sandbox near the shore. Alexander and Olivia were initially shy, hiding behind Emma's legs when Leonard greeted us at the door. But their reserve didn't last long, especially once Alexander spotted the collection of hand-carved wooden dinosaurs Leonard had arranged on a shelf at precisely kid height. Are those for us? He asked, pointing. Leonard knelt down to his level. They sure are. I thought you might like them. Your dad told me you're a dinosaur expert. Alexander's chest puffed up with pride. I know all their names. That one's a Triceratops, and that's a T-Rex, and that's a Brachiosaurus. As Alexander launched into his comprehensive dinosaur knowledge, Olivia gravitated toward a child-sized rocking chair by the fireplace. I made that just for you, Leonard told her gently. Your daddy said you like to rock while you listen to stories. Olivia looked at me for confirmation, and when I nodded, she climbed into the chair and began to rock, a small smile playing on her lips. The weekend unfolded with surprising ease. We fished off the dock, built sandcastles, and roasted marshmallows over the fire pit. Leonard taught Alexander how to skip stones across the water and showed Olivia how to identify different bird calls. The children warmed to him quickly, their natural openness unhindered by the complicated history between us adults. On the final evening, as Emma and I packed up the car, I found Leonard sitting on the porch swing with both children, reading them one last story before our departure. And they all lived happily ever after, he concluded, closing the book. Grandpa Len, Alexander said, the title he'd spontaneously adopted halfway through the weekend. Will we come back to visit you? Leonard's eyes found mine over Alexander's head, carefully not presuming. That's up to your mom and dad, he answered diplomatically. I think we can arrange that, I said, surprising myself with how right it felt. This is a family cabin, after all. The gratitude in Leonard's expression was unmistakable, but it was the joy on my children's faces that confirmed I'd made the right decision. Family, as Richard had taught me, wasn't just about where you came from. It was about who stayed, who sacrificed, who loved without keeping score. As we drove home that evening, the children already dozing in the back seat, Emma reached over to squeeze my hand. Full circle, she murmured. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. 8 years ago, I'd paid off a mortgage to help a family that had rejected me, never expecting anything in return. That act of generosity had transformed not only the Hendersons, but also, unexpectedly, my relationship with my own father. Richard called the next morning, eager to hear how the weekend had gone. When I described the children's easy acceptance of Leonard, he chuckled. Children have better instincts than we do sometimes, he observed. They see people as they are now, not as they were. A skill I'm still learning, I admitted. We all are, Richard assured me. That's what family is. A continuous lesson in forgiveness, in growth, in seeing each other with fresh eyes each day. 1 year later, we gathered at the cabin again, an expanded group this time. Richard and Margaret, Emma and me, the children, Leonard, and a surprise addition. Leonard's new girlfriend, Susan, a kind-eyed librarian he'd met at a community event in Burlington. As we sat around the large oak table Leonard had built, now extended to accommodate our growing family, Richard raised his glass. To my family, he said simply, in all its forms and iterations. To family, we echoed, the word holding layers of meaning unique to each of us. Later that evening, as the sun set over the lake, Leonard and I stood on the dock, watching Alexander and Richard attempt to catch fireflies near the shore. I never thought I'd have this, Leonard said quietly. A second chance, grandchildren, you, speaking to me again. Neither did I admitted. But I've learned something important over these past years. I turned to face him directly. Sometimes the people who should embrace you the most are the ones who push you away the hardest. And sometimes, the only way forward is to offer the very thing you were denied: acceptance, forgiveness, family. The mortgage I'd paid off years ago had purchased more than a house. It had bought a lesson in what family truly meant. Not a static entity defined by birth or marriage, but a living, growing organism shaped by choice, by effort, by love, freely given without guarantee of return. In the fading light, I watched Richard lift Olivia onto his shoulders to reach a particularly elusive firefly. Margaret and Emma laughed, together on the porch swing. Susan taught Alexander a clapping game on the steps, and Leonard stood beside me, tentative but present, part of the tapestry we were all weaving together, thread by thread, day by day. Family, in all its complex, imperfect, beautiful forms. 3 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Alexander entered 3rd grade, already showing a talent for mathematics that made Richard beam with pride. Olivia started kindergarten, her artistic abilities apparent in the colorful drawings that covered our refrigerator. Pixel Pulse had grown from a promising startup to an industry leader, our new AI integration platform attracting attention from major tech corporations. But the most significant changes had occurred within our extended family dynamic. Leonard had become a fixture in our lives, not just during holidays or special occasions, but in the everyday fabric of our existence. He attended Alexander's baseball games and Olivia's dance recitals. He joined us for Sunday dinners at the Hendersons twice a month. He and Susan had married in a small ceremony at the cabin, with Richard serving as his best man, a development that still occasionally struck me as surreal. The cabin itself had evolved into our family retreat, a neutral ground where the complex history between us all seemed less important than the present we were building together. We'd expanded it slightly, adding a bunk room for the children and their cousins, a larger deck for summer barbecues, and a dock extension for the small sailboat Leonard had restored. It was at the cabin, during a crisp October weekend in 2026, that the next chapter of our story began to unfold. We had gathered for what had become an annual tradition, the Family Strategy Summit, as Richard jokingly called it. It had started as a casual conversation about holiday plans 3 years earlier, but had evolved into a more structured discussion about the coming year, coordinating schedules, planning vacations, sharing goals and challenges. This particular summit felt different from the outset. Richard, now fully recovered from his heart attack but noticeably more deliberate in his movements, arrived with a thick folder of documents. Margaret seemed unusually tense, rearranging throw pillows and straightening picture frames with nervous energy. "Everything okay?" I asked her quietly while the others were settling in. She gave me a tight smile. Richard has something he wants to discuss with everyone. It's significant. Once we were all assembled in the living room, Emma and I on the high couch, Leonard and Susan in adjacent armchairs, the children playing a board game by the fireplace, Margaret perched on the arm of Richard's recliner. Richard cleared his throat. I appreciate everyone making time for our annual planning session, he began formally. Before we get into the usual calendar coordination, there's something important I need to share with you all. He opened the folder and extracted several documents. As you know, Henderson Financial has been my life's work for nearly 40 years. What you may not know is that I've been considering retirement for the past year. This wasn't entirely surprising. Richard had been gradually reducing his client load, spending more time on personal projects and with the grandchildren. But the folder suggested there was more to this announcement than a simple retirement plan. I've received several offers to sell the firm, he continued. Generous offers, but I've decided on a different path forward. He looked directly at me. Jackson, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to take over Henderson Financial, not as an employee, but as the new owner. The room fell silent. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Richard smiled. I want you to take over my company. You have the business acumen, the technology expertise that we're increasingly needing, and most importantly, the integrity I've always tried to maintain as our guiding principle. But I'm not a financial advisor, I stammered. I don't have the certifications, the experience, all of which can be acquired, Richard countered calmly. The transition would be gradual, 18 months, perhaps 2 years. I would stay on as a consultant and mentor. We have an excellent team already in place. What we need is new leadership for a new era. Emma squeezed my hand, her expression a mix of surprise and excitement. What about Brian? I asked, referring to Richard's longtime second-in-command, who many had assumed would eventually take over. Brian is an excellent advisor, but he has no interest in ownership or upper management. He's declined my previous offers. Richard leaned. Fort? This isn't a hasty decision, Jackson. I've been watching you build and lead teams at Pixel Pulse for years. Your ability to innovate while maintaining ethical standards, to grow without sacrificing quality, these are exactly what Henderson Financial needs. I glanced at Leonard, curious about his reaction. He was watching me with undisguised pride, nodding slightly as if to say, You deserve this. I don't know what to say, I admitted. This is unexpected. You don't need to decide immediately, Richard assured me. Take some time. Look over these documents. Discuss it with Emma. Come shadow me for a few days to get a feel for the operation. Margaret spoke up. What Richard isn't saying is how much this would mean to both of us. Knowing the company would stay in the family, that the relationships we've built with clients over decades would continue to be honored. Family. There was that word again, the one that had once been used to exclude me, now being invoked to include me in the most significant way possible. I'll think about it, I promised. Seriously? Richard nodded, satisfied. That's all I ask. Later that evening, after the children were asleep in the bunk room, the adults gathered around the fire pit on the deck. The night was cool but clear, stars reflecting on the still surface of the lake. So, Leonard said, breaking the comfortable silence, quite an offer Richard made today. I nodded, still processing the magnitude of what Richard was proposing. I'm not sure I'm the right person for it. Why not? Susan asked. In the 3 years I'd known her, I'd come to value her straightforward perspective. I've built my career in tech, not finance. It's a completely different industry, with a different skill set. Is it, though? Richard mused. At their core, both fields are about solving problems, building systems, managing relationships. The specific knowledge can be learned. Emma, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke. "There's something else bothering you about this." "What is it?" She knew me too well. Pixel Pulse has been my professional identity for over a decade. I was employee number 6. I helped build it from nothing. Leaving feels like abandoning something important. Or completing it, Leonard suggested. You took a startup to an industry leader. That's no small achievement. Maybe this is the next mountain to climb. I appreciated his perspective but wasn't entirely convinced. "And what about you?" I asked Richard. "Henderson Financial has been your life's work. Are you really ready to step back?" Richard exchanged a glance with Margaret. "More than ready. When I had that heart attack, it clarified many things. I want more time with my grandchildren. I want to travel with Margaret while we're still healthy enough to enjoy it. The company has been my identity for so long, but I'm ready for a new chapter." He smiled. "Besides, I'm not disappearing. I'll be there to help with the transition, to introduce you to clients, to share everything I've learned." The conversation continued late into the night, exploring potential pitfalls and opportunities, addressing practical concerns about the transition. By the time we headed to bed, I felt less overwhelmed but still uncertain. Emma and I discussed it further as we prepared for sleep in the small guest room overlooking the lake. "What are you thinking?" she asked, brushing her hair by the window. "I'm thinking about legacy," I admitted. "About what we leave behind, what we build for the future." She set down her brush and came to sit beside me on the bed. "Is that why you're hesitating? Because Henderson Financial isn't something you built from the ground up?" "Partly," I acknowledged. "But also, taking over Richard's company feels like such a defining step. Like I'd truly be becoming a Henderson in a way I never anticipated." Emma took my hand. "You've been a Henderson in all the ways that matter for years now. This is just Richard acknowledging that in the most profound way he knows how, by entrusting you with what he values most professionally." "What do you think I should do?" I asked, genuinely wanting her input. "I think you should spend a few days at Henderson Financial. See if it feels right. This isn't just about capabilities. It's about fit, about vision." She smiled. "And for what it's worth, I think you'd be exceptional at it. You have a way of inspiring trust in people, of seeing potential others miss." A week later, I took Richard up on his suggestion to shadow him. What I'd expected to be a somewhat dry exposition of financial advising turned out to be far more engaging than I'd anticipated. At its heart, Henderson Financial wasn't just about money management, but about helping families secure their futures, protect their legacies, and realize their dreams, themes that resonated deeply with me. The existing team was impressive, skilled, dedicated professionals who clearly respected Richard and were cautiously receptive to the idea of new leadership. Brian, the second-in-command I'd worried about displacing, was genuinely enthusiastic about the prospect of my involvement. "Fresh perspectives are exactly what we need," he told me over lunch. "Richard's been trying to get me to take over for years, but I know my strengths. I'm an excellent advisor, but I don't have the vision to lead the company into the next decade." "You might." Over the following months, I divided my time between Pixel Pulse and Henderson Financial, gradually shifting my focus as I became more certain of my decision. The transition wasn't without challenges. There were regulatory certifications to obtain, client relationships to establish, industry norms to learn. But there was also an undeniable rightness to evolution, a sense that I was building on both Richard's legacy and my own experience in a way that honored both. By the summer of 2027, the official announcement was made. I would become the new CEO and principal owner of Henderson Financial, with Richard remaining as chairman emeritus and special advisor. The reactions from clients were overwhelmingly positive, many expressing appreciation for keeping the firm in the family. The irony of that phrase wasn't lost on me. The formal transition ceremony was held at the Burlington Country Club on a perfect June evening. Colleagues, clients, friends, and family gathered to celebrate Richard's career and welcome the new leadership. Alexander and Olivia, dressed in their finest, stood proudly beside their grandparents as Richard delivered his farewell address. When I founded Henderson Financial 38 years ago, I had a simple mission: to help families build secure futures with integrity and personal attention. That mission has never changed, though the world around us has transformed many times over. He gestured toward me. In choosing my successor, I looked for someone who embodies those same values while bringing the vision and innovation needed for the decades ahead. I found those qualities in a person I once, regrettably, failed to recognize as family. A murmur rippled through the audience. While our personal history wasn't widely known, there had been enough overlap in our social and professional circles that many were aware of the early tension between us. Jackson Thompson came into our lives 13 years ago, and though I'm ashamed to admit it, I initially saw him as an outsider, someone who didn't fit the Henderson mold. Richard's voice grew more reflective. What I failed to understand then was that family isn't defined by a last name or a pedigree, but by character, by commitment, by the willingness to put others before oneself. He turned to face me directly. Jackson taught me that lesson through an act of extraordinary generosity that I won't detail here, but which changed the course of our family forever. Today, as I entrust him with the company I've built, I do so with absolute confidence that Henderson Financial isn't just changing hands, it's evolving into its next and best iteration. The applause was warm and genuine. As I stepped up to the podium to give my acceptance speech, I saw Emma wiping away tears, Alexander beaming with pride, Olivia giving me a thumbs up. Margaret and Richard stood together, their expressions a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. And in the back of the room, Leonard watched quietly, his eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, Richard, for that incredibly generous introduction," I began. "When I think about the journey that brought us here today, I'm reminded of something Richard himself once told me. Family isn't just about where you come from. It's about who stays, who sacrifices, who loves without keeping score." I glanced around the room, making eye contact with the people who had shaped my life in various ways. 13 years ago, I was certain of very few things: that I loved Emma, that I wanted to build a life with her, and that I was willing to do whatever it took to be part of her family, even if they weren't yet ready to be part of mine. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the audience. What I couldn't have anticipated was how completely that persistence would be rewarded, not just with acceptance, but with the kind of deep integration that makes it hard to remember there was ever a time when we weren't family. I turned toward Richard. Taking over Henderson Financial isn't just a professional opportunity for me. It's a chance to continue building on the foundation of integrity and service that Richard established, to blend tradition with innovation, to honor the past while creating the future. As the evening wound down, with handshakes and congratulations, gradually giving way to more intimate family conversations, Leonard approached me at the bar. "Quite a night," he said, signaling the bartender for 2 scotches. "Surreal," I agreed. If someone had told me 13 years ago that I'd be taking over Richard Henderson's company with his blessing, I'd have questioned their sanity. Leonard handed me a glass. Life has a way of surprising us. 3 years ago, I was resigned to never meeting my grandchildren. Now I'm walking Olivia to school twice a week and teaching Alexander how to use a lathe. We clinked glasses, acknowledging the parallel journeys we'd both traveled, from outsiders to integral members of the family circle. "You know," Leonard said thoughtfully, "when Richard first contacted me about you, I was suspicious. Though maybe he was setting me up somehow, looking for proof I wasn't worthy of reconnecting with you. He can be protective," I acknowledged. It wasn't until our 3rd or 4th meeting that I realized what was really happening. Leonard smiled. He was giving me a blueprint, showing me, through his own experience, how a father-in-law could become a true father figure, how bridges could be rebuilt across years of distance. He was offering me hope by example. I'd never considered this perspective before, that Richard's intervention with Leonard might have been as much about providing a model for redemption as it was about reuniting father and son. "He's a wise man," I said simply. "Wisdom earned through mistakes," Leonard replied. "The best kind. Something we have in common." As the celebration drew to a close, our extended family gathered for a final toast on the country club terrace. The pike, summer twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a warm glow over the assembled faces. Richard and Margaret, Emma and the children, Leonard and Susan, even Brian and several key team members who had become friends over the transition months. Richard raised his glass. "To Henderson Financial, past, present, and future." "To family," Emma added, her eyes meeting mine with a depth of understanding that transcended words. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, I took a moment to absorb the scene, this unlikely assemblage of people connected by choice as much as circumstance, by forgiveness as much as obligation, by love as much as legacy. 13 years earlier, I'd paid off a mortgage to help a family that had rejected me, never expecting anything in return. That act had set in motion a chain of events I couldn't have anticipated. Healing old wounds, creating new bonds, transforming strangers into family. And now, as I prepared to step into Richard's professional shoes, continuing the work he'd begun decades before, I understood more deeply than ever. Family isn't something you're born into or married into. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice, act of love by act of love. Sometimes against resistance, sometimes through pain, always with persistence and hope. Richard caught my eye across the terrace and raised his glass in a silent, personal toast. I returned the gesture, acknowledging all that had passed between us, the rocky beginning, the gradual thaw, the profound connection that had ultimately led us here. In that moment, under the fading Vermont summer sky, surrounded by the family I had fought for, and finally, completely won, I knew with absolute certainty I was home. 5 years into my leadership of Henderson Financial, the company had undergone a transformation that even Richard admitted had exceeded his expectations. We'd expanded our client base by 40%, opened a second office in Boston, and successfully integrated a digital platform that allowed clients to monitor their investments in real time while maintaining the personal touch that had always been the firm's hallmark. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Several long-standing clients had initially been skeptical about the tech guy taking over their trusted advisor's role. A few had even transferred their accounts elsewhere. But the majority had stayed, and as our innovative approaches began yielding impressive results, many returned, bringing friends and family members with them. Life at home has evolved as well. Alexander, now 13, was showing serious talent. As a programmer, spending hours building games and apps that impressed even my former colleagues at Pixel Pulse. Olivia, at 11, had developed into a gifted violinist, her dedication to practice reminiscent of Emma's focus during her medical residency years ago. Emma had been promoted to Chief of Pediatrics at Burlington Medical, her compassionate approach to children's health care earning her recognition throughout New England. We'd moved to a larger home closer to her parents, a decision that once would have filled me with dread, but now seemed natural, even welcome. Richard, at 74, had embraced retirement with unexpected enthusiasm. He and Margaret traveled extensively, cruising the Mediterranean, exploring the national parks, spending winters in a small condo in Key West. Between trips, he divided his time between grandchildren, golf, and occasional consultation at Henderson, financial when complex situations arose with longtime clients. Leonard and Susan had settled permanently in Burlington, renovating a small Victorian home near downtown. Leonard's woodworking had evolved from hobby to profession. His custom furniture, now sought after by discerning clients throughout Vermont. At 67, he had achieved a peace I could see in his steady hands and clear eyes, so different from the nervous man I'd first met at the cabin all those years ago. It was during our annual Thanksgiving gathering in 2031 that the next significant chapter in our family story began to unfold. We had assembled at Richard and Margaret's house, a tradition that had persisted despite my initial suggestion that we could host now that we had the larger home. Some traditions shouldn't change, Richard had insisted. Besides, Margaret would never forgive me if she didn't get to showcase her turkey recipe. The house was filled with the familiar chaos of family. Alexander and his cousins debating the merits of various gaming platforms, Olivia practicing a new piece on her violin in the sunroom, Emma and Margaret coordinating the complex choreography of preparing dinner for 16 people. Leonard was showing Susan's nephew how to properly carve a turkey, while Richard and I discussed the potential implications of recent Federal Reserve announcements on our investment strategies. It was Susan who first noticed something was amiss. "Margaret, are you feeling all right?" she asked, pausing in her arrangement of a flower centerpiece. "You look a bit pale." All eyes turned to Margaret, who was leaning heavily against the kitchen counter. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just a little tired." But Emma, with her physician's instincts, was already moving toward her mother, concern etched on her face. "Mom, sit down. Let me check your pulse." Margaret reluctantly complied, but as she attempted to move toward a chair, she suddenly clutched her left arm, her face contorting with pain. "Richard!" she gasped, before collapsing. What followed was a blur of activity. Emma performed CPR while I called 911. Richard kneeling beside his wife, his face ashen. The children are ushered into another room by Susan. The arrival of paramedics, the frantic ride to the hospital, the tense hours in the waiting room. The diagnosis was a severe heart attack, the kind medical professionals somberly refer to as the widowmaker. Margaret underwent emergency surgery, a triple bypass that the doctors described as successful but cautioned would require months of careful recovery. For 5 days, we maintained a rotation at the hospital similar to the one we'd established during Richard's heart attack years earlier. Richard refused to leave Margaret's side except when forced by hospital policy. Emma utilized her staff privileges to bend visiting hour rules for family members. Alexander and Olivia created handmade cards and small gifts that accumulated on Margaret's bedside table. When she was finally cleared to return home, it was with a daunting list of lifestyle changes, medication regimens, and rehabilitation requirements. Richard, determined to provide the same level of care Margaret had given him during his recovery, threw himself into the role of caretaker with characteristic intensity. But as the weeks passed, it became increasingly apparent that their spacious, colonial home, with its multiple staircases, extensive grounds, and isolated location, was no longer suitable for their needs. Margaret struggled with the stairs, Richard with the maintenance, both with the distance from medical facilities. It was during a quiet Saturday afternoon visit, while Olivia was playing her violin for Margaret in the sunroom, that Richard broached the subject with me. "We need to downsize," he admitted, his voice low so Margaret wouldn't overhear. "This house has been our home for 40 years, but it's too much now." I nodded, having anticipated this conversation. "Have you thought about what kind of place would work better?" "Something single level, closer to town to the hospital, smaller but with enough room for when family visits." He sighed. "The thought of sorting through 4 decades of accumulated belongings is overwhelming." "We'll help," I assured him. "All of us. You don't have to do this alone." Richard gave me a grateful look. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you about this house." "What about it?" "I don't want to sell it to strangers. This house has been the center of our family for generations." Alexander took his first steps in the living room. Olivia played her first recital in the sunroom. He met my eyes directly. I'd like you and Emma to consider buying it, making it your family home. The offer took me by surprise. Richard, that's incredibly generous, but this house must be worth— I'm not offering it as a gift, he clarified. Quickly. Though I would give it to you if I thought you'd accept. I'm proposing a fair market transaction. You and Emma buy the house, Margaret and I find something more suitable, and the house stays in the family. It was a practical solution to multiple challenges, and after discussing it extensively with Emma, we agreed. The process moved quickly. Richard and Margaret found a beautiful single-story condominium in a new development near the hospital, with both accessibility features and enough space for family gatherings. We arranged for the purchase of their home, structuring it in a way that provided them with the financial flexibility they needed while respecting their pride and independence. The day of the move was emotional for everyone. Alexander and Olivia helped pack boxes of their grandparents' treasured possessions, carefully labeling each one. Susan organized the kitchen items with military precision. Leonard and I dismantled furniture too large for the new condo, promising to store it safely in case it was wanted later. As the moving crew loaded the last of the boxes, Richard stood in the empty foyer, his expression distant. Having second thoughts? I asked gently. He shook his head. Not about moving. It's the right decision. I was just remembering the first time you walked through that door bringing Emma home for Thanksgiving. I was such a fool. You were protecting your daughter, I countered. From your perspective, I was an unknown entity, a potential risk. No. Richard disagreed firmly. I was protecting an image of what our family should look like, of the kind of man I thought was suitable for my daughter. Thank God Emma had better judgment than her father. Before I could respond, Margaret appeared at his side, linking her arm through his. Her recovery was progressing well, but she still moved with a deliberate carefulness that worried us all. Are we reminiscing about the good old days when you were a stubborn old goat? She asked Richard with affectionate teasing. He smiled ruefully. Something like that. She turned to me. Take good care of this house, Jackson. It has sheltered us through many seasons of life. Now it's your family's turn. We will, I promised. As they prepared to leave, Richard paused at the door. Oh, I almost forgot. There's something in the study for you. Top drawer of the desk. After they departed for their new home, I went to the study, now my study, and opened the drawer Richard had indicated. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate detail. I recognized it immediately as Leonard's work. The box contained a single key attached to a brass tag engraved with the address of the lake cabin. Beneath it was a note in Richard's precise handwriting. Jackson, the cabin has always been a place of healing and reconnection for our family. Leonard has been its faithful caretaker, but it's time for a new generation to assume ownership. The property is now legally transferred to you and Emma. This is not a gift, but a recognition of what you've already earned through your commitment to our family. Use it well, build memories there, keep it as a sanctuary for all of us, past, present, and future, Hendersons and Thompsons alike. With love and gratitude, Richard I sat in what had been Richard's chair for 40 years, now mine, holding the key, to a property that had become the heart of our extended family's connection. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, taking ownership of both the Henderson ancestral home and the cabin where so much healing had occurred, becoming the steward of the physical spaces that housed our shared history. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, moving our family into the Henderson home while settling Richard and Margaret into their condo, helping Leonard inventory the cabin's needs for the coming winter, maintaining the rhythm of work at Henderson Financial, supporting Emma through a challenging transition period at the hospital. It was mid-December when we finally had a moment to breathe, a quiet Sunday evening with the children already in bed, a fire crackling in the living room fireplace, snow falling gently outside. It feels strange, doesn't it? Emma said, curled beside me on the couch. Being here, in this house, without them. But with traces of them everywhere, I agreed, looking around at the familiar space that now contained our furniture alongside pieces Richard and Margaret had left behind. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the china cabinet in the dining room, the hand-knotted Persian rug beneath our feet. Alexander asked me today if he could have Dad's old study as his bedroom, Emma said with a smile. Apparently, it has better feng shui for his coding projects. I laughed. What did you tell him? That we'd consider it. It seems fitting somehow. That room has always been the domain of the Henderson man of the house. And now that's Alexander, I mused. Funny how things evolve. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, Do you ever think about how different our lives would have been if you hadn't overheard that phone call all those years ago? If you hadn't paid off their mortgage? I considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. I'd like to believe we would have found our way to where we are now eventually, but I'm not sure. Your father was determined in his resistance. And you were equally determined to win him over, she pointed out. I was determined to win you, I corrected gently. Your father was just an obstacle course I had to navigate to get there. She laughed, then grew thoughtful again. But you did more than navigate. You changed him. You changed all of us. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from Leonard, and uncharacteristically urgent. Need to speak with you about the cabin. Issue with the property line. Neighbor claims part of the dock is on their land. Can you meet tomorrow? I showed Emma the message with a sigh. So much for a quiet week before the holidays. Go, she encouraged. Get it sorted out before it becomes a bigger problem. The next morning, I drove to the cabin through freshly fallen snow, the landscape transformed into a winter wonderland that made the familiar road seem almost magical. Leonard's truck was already parked in the driveway when I arrived. I found him inside, standing by the large picture window overlooking the lake, no sign of distress or urgency in his posture. What's going on with the property line dispute? I asked, stamping snow from my boots in the entryway. Leonard turned, his expression apologetic. There is no dispute. I needed a reason to get you out here alone. I stared at him, confused. What's wrong? Is it Susan? Are you sick? Nothing's wrong, he assured me quickly. I just needed to speak with you privately, and this seemed the best way? Relief gave way to curiosity. About what? Leonard gestured to the kitchen table, where a folder lay open. Richard and I have been working on something, a project we weren't sure would come together in time. I moved closer, examining. The papers spread across the table, architectural drawings, permit applications, construction estimates. What is all this? Plans for an addition to the cabin, Leonard explained. 2 more bedrooms, a larger kitchen, a workspace that could double as a music room for Olivia's violin practice. I picked up one of the drawings, studying the detailed rendering. This is beautifully designed, but why all the secrecy? Leonard smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes that reminded me suddenly of Alexander. Because it's meant to be a surprise, for Christmas, from Richard and Margaret, Susan, and me to your family. That's incredibly generous, but before you object, Leonard interrupted gently, there's something you should know. When Richard transferred the cabin to you, he retained a small portion of the funds, money that was specifically earmarked for this expansion. And I've been saving my earnings from the furniture commissions for the same purpose. I was touched by the thoughtfulness, but still confused about the urgency. Why tell me now, right before the surprise? Leonard's expression grew more serious. Because we need your approval on the final plans this week if construction is to begin in the spring. And because, he hesitated, because I wanted you to understand what this represents to us. To me, especially. He picked up one of the drawings, pointing to specific features. These bedrooms are positioned to maximize the morning light. The workspace has built-in shelving designed specifically for Olivia's music and Alexander's coding references. The kitchen expansion includes the island Emma has always wished for. I was struck by how much thought had gone into each detail, how intimately they understood our family's needs and preferences. When you paid off Richard's mortgage, Leonard continued, you weren't just addressing a financial problem. You were making a statement about belonging, about commitment to family regardless of how they'd treated you. Richard understood that eventually, and it changed him profoundly. He met my eyes directly. When Richard helped me reconnect with you, he was passing that lesson forward. And now, this expansion is our way of honoring what you created, a family, bound not by obligation or tradition, but by choice and love. I examined the plans again, seeing them now not just as an architectural project, but as a tangible expression of how our unconventional family had expanded, embracing new connections, while honoring established ones. Thank you, I said simply. It's perfect. Leonard nodded, satisfied. Richard thought you might try to talk us out of it if we presented it as a gift. He said, and I quote, Jackson still has trouble accepting generosity, ironically enough. I laughed, recognizing the truth in Richard's assessment. He knows me well. Better than he ever expected to, Leonard agreed. That evening, as I drove back to Burlington, the plans safely stowed in my briefcase for formal approval, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. From an outsider desperately trying to earn acceptance to the custodian of the Henderson legacy, both the business and the family homes. The mortgage I'd paid off years ago had indeed purchased far more than a house. It had set in motion a transformation that none of us could have anticipated. Richard evolving from rigid patriarch to wise mentor, Leonard from absent father to devoted grandfather, me from rejected son-in-law to central pillar of an expanded family definition. As I pulled into the driveway of what was now our home, the Henderson family house where I had once felt so unwelcome, I paused to appreciate the holiday decorations Emma and the children had put up in my absence. Lights twinkled along the roofline, wreaths adorned the windows, and a handmade sign over the door proclaimed, Welcome to the Thompson-Henderson home. Family. In its most beautiful and authentic form, not defined by blood or tradition or expectation, but built through persistence, forgiveness, generosity, and love. A continuous work in progress, expanding to include more connections rather than fiercely guarding its boundaries. I entered the house, my house, our house, carrying not just the plans for the cabin expansion, but the profound understanding that the most valuable things we build in this life aren't structures of wood and stone, but bridges between hearts once separated by pride, pain, and misunderstanding. Richard had been right all those years ago. Love is indeed a foundation, not a house. But with the right foundation, extraordinary homes can be built. Homes large enough to shelter all the complex, beautiful relationships that make a life truly rich. 2 years after the cabin expansion, we gathered for what had become our traditional summer solstice celebration. The renovated cabin easily accommodated our growing family, Richard and Margaret, now in their mid-70s but still vibrant despite their health scares. Leonard and Susan settling comfortably into their late 60s, Emma and me, and the children, though children hardly seemed the right term anymore. Alexander, 15, towered over his grandfather Richard, his lanky frame and thoughtful demeanor, reminiscent of photos I'd seen of my father at the same age. Olivia, 13, had her mother's grace and her grandmother's determined spirit, evidenced by her dedication to both violin and the environmental activism club she'd started at school. They'd been joined by new additions to our extended family, Susan's niece Melissa and her husband David, who had recently moved to Burlington, Brian from Henderson Financial and his wife Claire, whose connection had evolved from professional to personal over the years, and even Tyler Walsh, my old friend from the bank who had inadvertently revealed my secret mortgage payment all those years ago, now a trusted financial advisor at our firm. As twilight settled over the lake, casting long golden reflections across the water, we gathered on the expanded deck. The renovation had transformed the cabin while preserving its essential character, much like how our family had evolved, I often thought. Richard stood to propose the traditional solstice toast, his voice still strong despite his years. To the longest day of the year, and to the family that makes every day meaningful. Glasses clinked, conversations resumed, and I found myself standing at the edge of the deck, taking in the scene with a sense of profound gratitude. Leonard joined me, leaning against the railing. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. The phrase a familiar exchange between us now. "Just appreciating the view," I replied. "All of it." He nodded, understanding my meaning. "It's come full circle, hasn't it? And then some." Before I could respond, Alexander approached, carrying a thick envelope. "Dad, Grandpa Richard asked me to give you this." He handed me the envelope with a curious expression. "He said it's important." As Alexander returned to the lively conversation around the fire pit, I opened the envelope to find a stack of legal documents and a handwritten note on top. Jackson. 18 years ago, you changed the course of our family with an act of extraordinary generosity that I, in my pride and prejudice, initially couldn't comprehend. Since then, you've continued to demonstrate what true family means, not through grand gestures, but through daily commitment, unwavering support, and quiet strength. The documents enclosed represent my attempt to formalize what has long been true in practice, your place at the center of our family legacy. Henderson Financial is now entirely yours. The remaining shares transferred effective today. The cabin property has been placed in a family trust that ensures it will remain a gathering place for generations to come, with you and Emma as primary trustees. There's also something I've kept private until now, a scholarship fund established in your name at Dartmouth, specifically for students who, like you, choose unconventional paths to success. The Jackson Thompson Innovation Scholarship has been quietly supporting promising students for 5 years, funded by the proceeds from investments I made with the money you insisted on returning to us after paying off our mortgage. Your generosity has multiplied beyond what either of us could have imagined, touching lives far beyond our immediate circle. I can think of no better definition of legacy. With love and admiration, Richard, I looked up from the letter to find Richard watching me from across the deck, his expression a mixture of affection and quiet satisfaction. He raised his glass slightly, in acknowledgement, a private communication amid the family celebration. Emma appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine. "Everything okay?" I handed her the letter, watching as she read it, her eyes widening slightly at the scholarship revelation. "He never mentioned this," she said softly. "He wouldn't," I replied. "That's not Richard's style." She folded the letter, carefully, returning it to the envelope. "You know what strikes me most about all of this? The ripple effect. One act of kindness, your decision to help my parents when they'd shown you nothing but coldness, has expanded into all of this." She gestured to the gathered family, the expanded cabin, the future symbolized by the scholarship program. As the evening progressed, I found a moment alone with Richard near the newly built dock, where he was admiring the sunset. "Thank you," I said simply, referencing the letter without elaboration. He nodded, understanding. "I should be thanking you. For everything." "I've been thinking about something you said years ago," I told him. "Love is a foundation, not a house." Richard smiled at the memory. "One of my more pedantic moments, I'm afraid." "No, you were right. But what I've come to realize is that while love may be the foundation, family is the house we build on it. Room by room, year by year, choice by choice. He considered this, then nodded slowly. Well put. And this house, he gestured to the cabin behind us, to the people gathered on its deck, has turned out rather magnificent, hasn't it? Beyond anything I could have imagined, I agreed. As darkness settled completely over the lake, we rejoined the others. Alexander was teaching his younger cousins how to make perfect s'mores over the fire pit. Olivia was playing her violin, the melancholy notes of a folk tune floating across the water. Margaret and Susan were deep in conversation about plans for a community garden at the senior center. Leonard was sketching designs for a new rocking chair on the back of a paper napkin. Emma caught my eye across the gathering and smiled. A private moment of connection amid the joyful chaos of family. 20 years ago, I had been told I would never be family. The mortgage I'd secretly paid off had been merely a first step on a journey I couldn't have anticipated, leading not just to acceptance, but to a complete reimagining of what family could be, not a closed circle jealously guarding its boundaries, but an ever-expanding web of connection, support, and love. As I looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, some related by blood, others by marriage, still others by choice and circumstance, I understood that the true value of family lay not in its exclusivity but in its capacity for growth, for forgiveness, for transformation. The Hendersons had said I'd never be family. They didn't know that in trying to prove them wrong, I would help create something far better than any of us had imagined. A family defined not by who it kept out, but by who it welcomed in. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.